What would you do if the one thing you wanted most in the world suddenly showed up at your door, half frozen and fighting for her life? The morning sun rose over the jagged peaks of the Wind River Range, painting the Wyoming wilderness in shades of gold and cold steel. Eli McCall stepped onto his rough wooden porch, a tin cup of steaming black coffee warming his hands. 3 years had passed since he'd left the noise of civilization behind and built a life out here where silence had weight, where every day demanded strength, and where a man learned exactly who he truly was. At 42, Eli moved with the quiet confidence of someone shaped by hard land and harder losses. His shoulders were broad, his frame lean from years of splitting wood, hauling water, and making peace with a world that offered no easy days. His dark hair had thinned a bit at the temples, and the lines around his eyes told the story of a man who had seen too much sorrow and not enough joy. His cabin sat alone in a natural clearing, built from pine logs he'd cut himself. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the sharp scent of burning wood into the cold autumn air. Inside, the cabin was simple but sturdy. One room with a stone fireplace, shelves of dried food, tools wrapped in oiled cloth, and a small wooden box he kept hidden behind a flour sack. He never opened that box, not after Sarah died, his wife, the woman whose memory pulled at him like a wound that never fully healed. Every day followed the same rhythm. Check the snares by the creek. Tend the small garden where stubborn potatoes clung to life. Chop wood. Mend whatever needed mending. The wilderness didn't forgive carelessness. A broken fence, a weak roof beam, or a forgotten snare could mean hunger, sickness, or death. Eli liked the discipline of it. The honesty. Out here, nothing lied. Nothing pretended. But today felt different. The air held a strange stillness. Even the forest birds seemed to sense it. Clouds gathered to the west, thick and heavy, promising a storm far worse than the usual November cold. The barometric glass on Eli's mantle had been dropping for 2 days, and he trusted that more than anything. A man who ignored warnings in this country usually didn't live long enough to regret it. He spent the morning preparing. Cutting wood until it stacked higher than his porch rail, filling barrels with creek water, bringing in potatoes and herbs from the garden. Winter came early to the mountains, and when it arrived, it came with fury. By afternoon, the first snowflakes drifted down, slow and heavy. Eli stood outside with his walking stick, lightning-scarred mountain ash, watching the world disappear behind a veil of white. The wind picked up, howling through the pines like something alive. Snow thickened until he couldn't see beyond the yard. By nightfall, the storm raged with full power, hammering the cabin and rattling the windows. Eli settled near the fire, a book of worn poetry in his hands. The flames cast warm shadows across the room. Outside, the wilderness roared, but inside, all was steady. Safe, predictable, just the way Eli liked it, until he heard the sound, a faint thud. Soft. Almost lost under the storm's howl, he frowned and listened harder. There it was again. 3 slow, weak knocks on his door. His heart kicked once, hard. Nobody knocked on his door. Nobody even came within miles of this valley. He grabbed his rifle from beside the fireplace and moved quietly toward the door, muscles tense, breath held. A voice split the storm. "Help, please." A woman's voice. Thin. Breaking. Barely louder than the wind. Eli didn't hesitate. He unlatched the heavy wooden bar and pulled the door open. A blast of icy wind slammed into him, carrying whipping snow and cold so sharp it burned. And then she fell into his arms, a young woman, wrapped in what used to be a fine wool cloak, now soaked and torn. Her dark hair hung in frozen strands around her face. Her skin was so pale he wasn't sure she was alive until he felt her trembling. Her lips were blue, her breath shallow. She looked like she'd walked straight out of a world he no longer belonged to, a world of polished tables, warm parlors, soft fabrics, and gentle living. Nothing about her belonged in a storm like this. He lifted her easily. She weighed almost nothing, and carried her inside, kicking the door shut with his boot. The wind screamed as if angry he'd taken its prey away. He lowered her into the chair closest to the fire and grabbed blankets, wrapping them around her shaking body. Her clothes were soaked and frozen against her skin. Her wrists were bruised, finger-shaped marks darkening the delicate flesh. A cut above her temple still bled slowly. Whoever she was, something or someone had hurt her. He worked fast. He peeled away her wet cloak, careful and respectful, focusing only on what needed to be done. He warmed a pot of broth on the stove and checked her pulse, relieved to find it faint but steady. As he cleaned the cut on her temple, she flinched in her half-conscious state. "No, please don't." "Easy," he said gently. "You're safe here." Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, gray eyes, storm gray. Intelligent even through the haze of pain. They locked onto his face with desperate hope. "Safe?" she whispered. "Safe," he promised. Her eyes slid closed again. Eli wrapped her in more blankets, moved her closer to the fire, and shook his head in disbelief. He had lived 3 years without seeing another soul. 3 years building a life of silence, routine, and numb peace. And in one night, a stranger had collapsed across his doorstep like an answer to a question he didn't dare ask. Who was she? What had she been running from? And why, out of every direction she could have gone, had fate driven her straight into the arms of a man who'd sworn never to care again? He didn't know. But he was about to find out. Because the wilderness didn't bring people to your door without a reason. And storms didn't push strangers into your life unless something bigger was coming behind them. The storm raged through the night, shaking the cabin walls. But inside, Eli kept the fire burning hot and steady. The young woman lay wrapped in blankets on his narrow bed, her breaths shallow but growing warmer with each hour. She had survived the night. That alone felt like a small miracle. By dawn, the wind still screamed, but light filtered through the frosted window. Eli sat in his chair, rifle propped beside him, watching her breathe. 3 years of silence, 3 years of living with nothing but his thoughts. And now a stranger lay in his home, changing everything without even speaking. A soft sound broke through the crackling of the fire. She was waking. Her eyelids fluttered first. Then her fingers twitched beneath the blanket. Finally, her gray eyes opened, focusing on the wooden beams above her, then traveling around the room, slow and unsure, like someone trying to remember where they were. When her eyes landed on Eli, she froze. He raised his hands gently, palms open. "You're safe," he said, voice low. "You're in my cabin. Wind, river, range. You made it through the storm." She swallowed, her throat too dry to speak. He poured a bit of warm broth into a tin cup and offered it, helping her lift it to her lips. She drank like someone who hadn't tasted warmth in days. After a moment, her voice came out hoarse but steady. "Who are you?" "Eli McCall. I live up here," he said simply. "Been on my own for a long time." She nodded slowly, processing his words, but her eyes held fear that went deeper than the blizzard. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, too long for it to be simple. Finally, she answered, "Clara." Just that, no last name. Her eyes dropped to her hands, and he saw it again. The bruises on her wrists. Not frostbite, not an accident. Someone had grabbed her. Hard. "What happened to you?" Eli asked quietly. Clara stared into the fire, breathing slow, steady breaths, like someone gathering courage to speak. I was traveling west," she said. "My stagecoach crashed in the storm." It was a reasonable story, believable, but Eli had lived long enough and suffered long enough to recognize a lie when he heard one. He didn't push her. Not yet. "Where were you headed?" he asked. She opened her mouth, closed it, then shook her head. "I don't know anymore." The truth sat there in her tone, heavy, sad. After a moment, she lifted a hand to the side of her head and winced. He moved closer, checking the bandage. "You took a good hit there," he said. "Whoever hurt you?" She flinched before she could stop herself. Eli's jaw tightened. Someone was chasing her. Someone dangerous. Someone who had driven her into a blizzard that could have killed her. He didn't ask more, not yet. The storm had taken enough out of her. Instead, he helped her sit up and gave her more broth, watching as color returned to her cheeks. "You saved my life," she said quietly, her voice steadier now. "Why?" Eli looked at her, this woman who had stumbled into his world like a ghost blown in by the storm. "Because you were on my doorstep," he said simply. "Because you needed help." Her gray eyes softened, not with trust yet, but with something close. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, uncomfortable with the gratitude, but unable to ignore how it warmed something deep inside him that he'd thought was long dead. The hours passed slow and quiet. The storm howled. Snow piled high against the door. Clara slept, and Eli kept watch, his thoughts tangled in questions he wasn't sure he wanted answers to. By mid-afternoon, she woke again, more alert this time. She tried to stand, but her legs wobbled. Eli caught her before she fell, his strong arms steady around her. She blinked up at him, breath catching, startled by how solid he felt, how safe. "You've got to take it slow," he said gently. "You were half frozen." "I'm not used to feeling weak," she whispered. "You're not weak. You survived." Something in her expression cracked then, something tired, something heartbreakingly human. She looked around the cabin, taking in the shelves, the tools, the carved wooden chair, the patched quilt he'd kept from his old life. "You live here alone?" she asked. 3 years now. "Why?" His fingers tightened on the wooden spoon he was holding. "Everyone has a story," he said quietly. "So do I," Clara whispered. "But I don't know if telling mine will save me or get us both killed." The way she said it made Eli's heartbeat change rhythm. He was about to speak when a sound cut through the storm, a distant thumping through the snow, faint, rhythmic, growing louder, hoofbeats. Eli froze. "No one comes out here," he whispered. Clara's face drained of color. Her hand flew to her throat, where she clutched something beneath her dress, a small chain. "They found me," she breathed. "They're here." Eli reached for his rifle. "Who?" he asked sharply. "Who's coming?" But Clara's eyes were wide with terror, fixed on the door as shadows moved across the snow outside. Before Eli could take another step, a voice boomed through the storm. "Miss Byron, come out peaceful-like." Clara's knees buckled. That wasn't her name. She'd lied about everything. And whoever was out there hadn't come to rescue her. They'd come to take her. Or worse. Eli chambered around, heart steady as stone. "Clara," he said, voice low, "you need to tell me everything, right now." Snow slammed against the cabin. Hoofbeats circled the clearing. A fist pounded the door. "Miss Byron, open up," quote. Clara's voice shook as she whispered, "Eli, if they take me, I won't survive." The pounding on the door grew sharper, louder, more impatient. Snow shook from the rafters with each blow. Clara stood frozen beside the fire, her trembling hands pressed against her chest as if she could hold her fear in place. Eli kept his rifle steady, the barrel pointed toward the door, though he didn't dare fire unless he had no choice. "Clara Byron?" he said quietly. "That your real name?" She swallowed hard. "My name is Clara Byron Byrne, my father. He's powerful, connected, and he hired those men to bring me back." "Why?" Eli asked. She looked at him with gray eyes full of shame and fear. "Because I know too much." Outside, a man barked orders. Eli heard snow crunching beneath boots as the riders spread out around the cabin. "How many?" Eli whispered. "3 for sure," Clara said, her voice barely audible. "Maybe more behind them." "What do they want? To drag you home?" quote. Her voice broke. "No. They want to silence me." Eli's heartbeat slowed, not in fear, but in clarity. The kind that came when a man understood exactly what he was up against. He moved to Clara, placing his free hand gently on her arm. "You trust me?" She nodded without hesitation. "Then listen close," he said. "We don't fight them in here. They'll smoke us out. We go through the root cellar." Clara's eyes widened. "Root cellar?" He didn't waste time explaining. He yanked up a loose floorboard, revealing a dark opening beneath it. "Grab your things! Only what you can carry!" A voice called from outside, thick with threat. "Last chance, Miss Byron. Open this door, or we open it for you." Clara grabbed her small bundle, the journal, the Bible, and one other item he didn't see. Eli handed her a spare coat and the small Derringer pistol she'd hidden. "You shoot only if you have no choice," he said. "Stay behind me." Smoke began to seep through the cracks in the doorframe. They really meant to burn the cabin down. Eli guided Clara into the root cellar, then followed her down, pulling the floorboard closed above them. The space was narrow and cold, lit only by the faint glow leaking through tiny cracks in the wood. "They'll find the door," Clara whispered. "They'll find it late," Eli said. The tunnel curves north. Snow crunched heavily above their heads. "Boots! Many of them!" Clara gripped his hand. "Eli, if they catch us." "They won't." He squeezed her hand reassuringly, then led her through the small tunnel carved through rock. The passage sloped slowly upward until they reached a second wooden door. Eli pushed it open. Cold air rushed in. The storm had calmed just enough to give them a fighting chance. They crawled out behind a thick wall of boulders, hidden from the cabin. Smoke rose from the roof as flames took hold. The Pinkertons were tearing the place apart looking for them. Clara's breath caught. "You're home." "Was just wood," Eli said. "You're alive. That's what matters." Her eyes softened, but there was no time for softness now. Eli grabbed the small supply cache he'd buried under stones. Jerky, hardtack, ammunition. "Can you run?" he asked. "I can try." "Then we move." Quote. They slipped through the trees, the snow deep but manageable. Every step mattered, every sound carried. Behind them, the cabin groaned as flames consumed the roof. They climbed uphill toward the old mining camp Eli had mentioned earlier. The air grew sharper, colder. Clara's breaths came quick and uneven, but she didn't complain. When they finally reached the abandoned camp, half-collapsed shacks and an old bunkhouse, Eli pulled her behind cover. "They'll track us," Clara said. "They'll try." He positioned himself at a window of the strongest building, rifle ready. Clara crouched beside him with her tiny pistol. They waited. Minutes stretched into hours. Just as the sun dipped low, Eli saw movement in the trees. Dark shapes. 3 men, the same ones from the cabin. They came fast. The first took cover behind a stump and fired. The bullet cracked past Eli's face, splintering wood. "Stay down," Eli said. A second man tried circling to the left. Eli fired once, the shot sharp and precise. The man fell, clutching his leg. Clara flinched at the sound, but she stayed steady. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They'll keep coming." "Then so will I," Eli said, "as long as you're behind me." The last 2 Pinkertons charged together, shouting, firing wild shots as they ran. Eli fired twice. The first shot slammed into his shoulder. The second tore into the snow at their feet, stopping their rush. One turned and limped back toward the trees, dragging the wounded man with him. Silence settled. Clara trembled, not from cold, but from the enormity of what had just happened. "Is it over?" she whispered. "For now," Eli said, "but not forever. We can't stay." She nodded, swallowing hard. "Eli, what do we do now?" He looked at her, this unexpected storm of a woman who had blown into his life and reminded him what it meant to care, to protect, to feel alive again. "We go west," he said, "far west, farther than your father's reach, new land, new start." Her eyes glistened. "Together?" she whispered. Eli stepped closer, lifting her chin gently with his hand. "If you'll have me." She didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. "I choose you," she whispered. "Not because I'm running, but because, for the first time in my life, I want to run towards something." Eli held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, the warmth of her body, the truth of her words. "Then we go together," he murmured. where no one knows us, where no one owns you, where no one can ever hurt you again. Snow continued to fall softly around them as the last light disappeared. A cabin burned miles behind. A future waited somewhere far ahead, and for the first time in years, Eli McCall felt hope. Real hope, the kind that warmed deeper than any fire. The kind born when a man realizes the wilderness doesn't just take, it gives too. Sometimes it gives back everything he thought he'd lost.